Welcome, everyone, to Intentional Conversations podcast. We're just giving it a moment or two for our virtual community to get loaded in and build up critical mass. And so while we're waiting, I am Dr. Nika White. My pronouns are she, her. I am the founder and lead principal consultant for NWC. Shout out to the Nika White consulting team, who works tirelessly week after week after week for the past 5 years to bring this virtual learning experience to the broader community. We are so glad that you're here with us. We are grateful to be in community and to be able to share knowledge and insights that helps us all to go deeper in our understanding of all things diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, justice, accessibility, and how those elements and constructs intersect with the work of leadership and business. We're so glad you're here today. I want to invite you to please go to the chat and let us know where you are joining the conversation from. We know that we have an audience that's here with us, part of our live Zoom community, but we also go live on LinkedIn, and there are a number of individuals that will catch the show that way. And so we want you to know that if you are joining us via LinkedIn Live, to use the comment section where you're pulling in all of those expressions and commentary and questions into our larger chat so that we all can be connected. Here at NWC, we really do value disability inclusion, and as a result, we have enabled closed caption for those that would gain value from that being available to you. So certainly lean into that feature and let it work to your favor. I also want you to know that today not only is Happy Friday, but it's also Valentine's Day. So we're extending so much love and appreciation to our community and to all of those who will be exposed to the content and the messages of today's conversation. I look forward to you hearing from our guest co-host today. And if you're a part of our Zoom community, then cameras are always welcome. We do appreciate and value smiling faces, but we also know that many individuals will join the conversation, maybe while you're multitasking in just an auditory capacity. In whatever way that you are here with us today, we are so grateful and we don't take that for granted. If you would desire this community to connect with you beyond this hour of time, then drop your LinkedIn information into the chat. That lets us know that we can reach out and connect with you. I certainly would be honored to connect with as many of you as possible, maybe that I'm not already connected with. And so I invite you to take a look at the chat where I have placed my LinkedIn information. And I do hope to align with you on LinkedIn as well. Once again, welcome to Intentional Conversations podcast. We're so glad you're here. Sit back, relax, and enjoy today's show. The music never gets old for me. I want to shout out Paciello, who works tirelessly with us as our marketing team, and they've done all of the graphics, all the things that you see that's part of this virtual production, and we are so grateful to be in partnership with them. So as the screen says, let the conversations begin, and that is precisely what we're about to do. I want you to know that this is our 5th year of Intentional Conversations, so we're celebrating all year long with many different opportunities, and I will share one of them momentarily, but including the opportunity for you to join us for some special episodes that will take place quarterly in the evening time. And it's going to be a reunion panel. I'll talk about the first one momentarily. But for now, I want you to know you can continue to enjoy Intentional Conversations, new episodes every week at this hour of time, every Friday. Now, it is February, so it is Black History Month. And while we celebrate Black history all year long, it is also really important to make sure we're amplifying the importance of Black history and all of the many contributions that Black individuals have contributed to our society. So we hope that you will find some way to deepen your knowledge and understanding and support of all of the Black individuals who are currently in your network or you want to put in your network, because let me tell you, they are really worthy of knowing and supporting. And American history certainly is Black history as well. So thank you for keeping that top of mind. For those of you who've been with us, you know that I have written a book, actually 3 books, and book number 3 is Inclusion Uncomplicated, a transformative guide to simplify DEI. That is in partnership with Forbes Publishing, Forbes Books, and that book turned 2 years old actually in January. And so I'm super excited because also in January, we released the paperback version of Inclusion Uncomplicated. So if you have not yet gotten your copy, I do encourage you to do so. Now is very timely for us to be reading content that helps us to understand what diversity, equity, and inclusion truly is, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. So I invite you to also encourage someone else to uncomplicate this narrative by having resources that they can put into their wheelhouse in order to understand deeply and more accurately what diversity, equity, and inclusion is, and make it uncomplicated. I also want you to know that at NWC, we like to make other resources available for people to deepen their knowledge and understanding. And so we have 4 LinkedIn Learning courses that yours truly has been able to facilitate. And so as a LinkedIn Learning instructor, there are 4 courses, as you see on the screen, that's available, one of which that I want to just amplify because it's going to find its way into a lot of our conversations today with our guest co-host, and that is navigating AI through an intersectional DEI lens. And so a great topic that aligns again with today's conversation, and also one that continues to grow because AI is here to stay and it is a powerful tool, but we have to know how to make it ethical and accessible to all. A bit more on that later in today's show. Another opportunity that I want you to be aware of is that we have launched a program called Boundless here at NWC. And this is a very transformative program that empowers women, particularly women of color, through lots of different touch points that really helps to instill the importance of a safe community to be able to create meaningful impact and to share common experiences. And as we are navigating really just the growth journeys that we each are on, especially in this very tumultuous time. So I invite you to look at some of the links that we're going to place into the chat that gives you more information. And specifically, it gives you information about 2 interest meetings that are coming up for you to gain more information and to potentially join this cohort community. So I look forward to having you as part of Boundless, a women's community of well-being, empowerment, and leadership. The next offering that we have at NWC is all about building a storytelling culture and a framework that allows organizations to more intentionally embed storytelling into the DNA of their operations. While personal narratives are not new to any of us, we share them every day. But what I'm finding is that we aren't necessarily seeing it as an incredible tool for building connections, particularly across different dimensions of diversity, and for building empathy and compassion and care in the workplace that can drive towards greater productivity and a healthy workplace culture. And so we want to help you do that. If that's of interest to you, then reach out to us. We will share a link into the chat for you to learn more on your own. But call us up. We want to have a conversation to be able to delve more into this topic of a storytelling culture framework. It's also important for us at NWC for you to understand some of these special events and opportunities that we have available. And as I've been mentioning, this is our 5th year anniversary for Intentional Conversations. And to recognize this milestone anniversary, we are each quarter having what we refer to as an Intentional Conversations reunion episode. It's going to take place during the evening hours, 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern. The first one coming up is February 24th, so just right around the corner. And we have a tremendous panel of women who are doing remarkable things in the space of leadership and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So you see the names on the screen. These women are incredible in their own rights. I hope that you will follow them, that you will join us for this conversation, which I know is going to be tremendously rich. And we look forward to having you celebrate with us on February 24th. We will drop the link to registration. This is a free event into the chat, and we hope that you will spread it to others in your network. Now, this gives me a moment to let you know what you have to look forward to in other weeks to come by way of our Intentional Conversations guest co-host. So on next Friday, February 21st, I'm super excited because Dr. Adrienne Johnson-Williams will be joining us. And in that intentional conversation, we're going to discuss the inspiration that launched her company, Standpoint Consulting, also Adrienne's perspective on the large number of organizations that are eliminating or reducing their DEI initiatives, as well as implementing organizational change. What does that consist of, and why is it so important? And then following that Friday, we're going to be rounding out February on the 28th with another intentional conversation with Sherry Dunn, someone definitely to follow. And we're going to be discussing her new book, The Meaning of Qualified, and how Black women inspired her and continue to inspire so many others, as well as the future plans for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So join us for those conversations, and we look forward to having you engage with us on those dates and times. Now, I've reached a point into our show today where it gives me great honor to give a proper introduction of today's guest co-host. I am super excited to be welcoming this individual. I think that the topic is very timely and it's going to be insightful for us all. And as I normally do, it feels very important for us to share with you the accolades, the credentials, the experiences in which our guest co-hosts show up to the conversation with. And we do that by reading the individual's bio. So allow me to do that at this time. Michael Paciello is Chief Accessibility Officer at Audio Eye, Inc., a digital accessibility corporation dedicated to ensuring web accessibility through AI and automation. Mike authored the first book on web accessibility and usability called Web Accessibility for People with Disabilities. And in 1997, Mr. Paciello received recognition from President William Clinton for his work in the creation of the World Wide Web's Consortium Web Accessibility Initiative. Mr. Paciello has served on the International Leader Technologist and Authority in the areas of emerging technology, accessibility, usability, and electronic publishing. In April 3rd, 2008, Mike and co-chair Jim Tobias presented a historic series of internationally harmonized technical recommendations to bridge the gap between technology and people with disabilities. As a result of these recommendations, the U.S. Access Board released a final rule that updates accessibility requirements covered by Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, along with guidelines for telecommunications equipment subject to Section 255 of the Communications Act of 1934. Big stuff. These 5 standards and guidelines were published in the Federal Register on January 18th of 2017 and went into effect in January 2018. Mike was the recipient of the 2016 Nobility Lifetime Achievement Award, the 2020 ICT Accessibility Testing Symposium Social Impact Award, and keynote speaker for the 2023 CSUN Assistive Technology Conference. On November 4th, Mike was recognized with the California State University Northridge 2024 Hero Award from the College of Health and Human Development. If you are aligned with me and excited about today's guest co-host, I want to invite this community to go to the chat, share whatever type of words of affirmation or welcome, emojis, reactions to let our guest co-host know how much we appreciate him being here with us today. And we look forward to hearing from Mike. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can bring Mike into the spotlight. I'm going to add him now. And Mike, before I release the mic to you and allow you to greet this audience in your own way, I will share that we have a tradition here at NWC, and that tradition is to invite our guest co-hosts before diving into our conversations, just to share a little bit about themselves that we would not know from reading your bio, which we've just heard, or from going to your LinkedIn profile. So welcome, Mike, and I want to turn the floor over to you.
Well, thank you very much for having me here, Nika. This is a very nice environment, very welcoming environment. You know, DE and I and A, if I can add that, right? Because that's
Yes.
really critical to, my path, my professional community. Accessibility has been my passion for the 45 years or so that I've been involved in it. So this is just a wonderful forum for being able to talk about this and share thoughts, I hope, with some of the folks that are visiting and listening in live today. Something new, something different about me that's not already in my bio. Thank goodness, because sometimes those bios, they just kind of, they're too long. And that's only because I'm old. That's really what that comes down to, right? But I should say that my last name is actually Paciello. And the way that I get people to remember it, and usually this backfires on me, is as I was growing up, kids used to call me Pass the Jello. And so that was the way that they learned how to pronounce my name. So that'll be something different. I don't think I've ever said that live on any of the podcasts or any of the recordings that I've done before. Yeah, I currently live, my wife Karen and I live in the beautiful area of Asheville, Asheville, North Carolina, that general area. So we're right here. I look out my window and I'm looking right into the Blue Ridge Mountains. So we love it out here where we are. But we're both actually from New Hampshire. We moved down here about 2 years ago. So thank goodness we're out of the snow, because if we were up there right now this week, they're getting creamed by the blizzards and the snow and the cold weather, and it's a nice 50 degrees or so right around here right now. So we love that. Um, I think probably a lot of our conversations are going to walk into things that will naturally emote stories that I'll be able to tell and share some of my experiences, over these years, right up to just recent times, last couple of weeks. Last 2 weeks ago, I was in Orlando, Florida, visiting with a lot of colleagues at the Assistive Technology Industry Association conference, and just had a lot of good things that came out of there. So, thanks again for having me here, and let's see where this takes us.
Awesome, fantastic. Thank you so much, Mike. We really appreciate you sharing a little bit of insight into you and your life and your experiences so far. So I just want to say that I'm actually based in Greenville, South Carolina. So there's a little bit of that Carolinas connection, and I have family that's in Asheville. Were you impacted at all by Hurricane Helene a few,
Yeah,
months ago? Yeah, I know
yeah, for
Asheville was hit
sure.
really hard.
We just had our roof repaired literally last week. And we still have lots of trees that are around that have fallen down. And so we're in recovery mode, but nothing like what you saw in Ash,
Yeah.
where we had actually, Karen and I had actually been there the week before in downtown Asheville and going shopping and things along those lines. All of that is all gone. It was really wreaked. The Swananoa area, the Black Mountain area, all of those areas. We feel so bad. Lake Lure, so bad for a lot of our friends and colleagues that are down in that general area. So we're fine where we are, but we're still a little bit of recovery mode.
Yeah, yeah. Well, wishing you and everyone else well in that area. I know it's been quite some months, but it was horrific to see, especially here in the Carolinas, being that I am, from this area as well. But I'm glad to know that you and your family are getting back to a place of full normalcy and restored to where you were before Hurricane Helene. Okay, so I want to jump right in, as I think that the conversation is so timely. And I think it's important for you, Mike, to walk us through from a historical perspective, thinking about your early work at Digital Equipment Corporation's Vision Impaired Information Services. How did that shape your perspective on accessibility? I'm really wanting us to understand your journey into this work.
Yeah, so when you introduced me, part of my bio talks about electronic publishing and my involvement at that level, and that's really how I got into this field. I had been at Digital Equipment for like 2 or 3 years at the time, was a technical writer, and had was starting to learn at that time a language that was called a programming language, if you will, called GenCode.
Hmm.
GenCode was invented by who now is a colleague and friend of mine, Charles Goldfarb from IBM. Basically, what that language did, it allowed you to look at electronic files, which used to always just be pure text, and put in structure into that electronic file. So you could say this is a paragraph, this is a heading, this is a list, right? And you could put that into it electronically. It functionally was the equivalent of what an editor, a publishing editor, would do once they got the script or the publication from a writer. So this is all being done electronically. And then I had a manager of mine ask me, "Hey, Mike, would you be interested in carrying a kind of a volunteer project for us?" I said, "Sure, why not?" And he said, "We have a relationship with the National Braille Press in Boston." So I'm based in New Hampshire, southern New Hampshire at that time.
Hmm.
And Boston was about 45 minutes away. And I said, sure. He said, once or twice a year, they ask us for a couple of our print books. And then we carry them down there. This is your job. You just take the books, bring them down there, and then they'll convert them to Braille. So I said, sounds easy enough. Ultimately, what that did was I went down there, I met with their director. This is roughly 1984, 85 timeframe. Bill Reeder was the director of the National Braille Press then, and he walked me through the process. And what blew my mind at that time, remember, I'm working on electronic files and we're making
Yeah.
them so we could take them from, on the screen, a word processor, and push them out to a printer, right? That was the big challenge back then, and get it all
Hmm.
formatted. These folks were taking a literal 700 or 800 page reference manual like this big,
Yeah.
taking each print page and then hand typing on a Braille typewriter to make
Mm.
a master copy and then running them through their,
Hmm.
their actual Braille presses. This is how I got started because immediately I thought to myself, well, wait a minute. If I could take an electronic file and I could call this is a paragraph, this is a heading, this is a list, and I can do this electronically, we can output it to a regular printer, which back then they
Yeah.
were dot matrix printers, right?
Yeah.
um, why can't I do it to a Braille printer? And so that led me to do a little bit of research. I started making connections with some friends who built Braille translators, excuse me, and were familiar with electronic files. Ultimately, that led to the creation of two things. One was the formation of an international working group called ICAD, the International Committee for Accessible Document Design,
Hmm.
and volunteer work that we got together to focus on creating a definition of what it meant or what it would take to create a file that could be an electronic file that could immediately be output to a Braille printer, to a Braille translator, or to a large text version or a voice ready file. And we worked on that, and it ultimately became a publishing standard, international standard. That was project one. The second project, because I was working on electronic files, at that time we were just starting to dive into electronic publishing and distribution on CD-ROMs and DVDs.
Oh,
So
wow, you're taking us back.
yeah. So that led to me creating at Digital Equipment this program that you see, the Vision Impaired Information Services Program Office, for which we released there the first ever fully accessible DVD and CD-ROM distribution with all the documentation that was accessible to blind, low vision, and then a collective community of individuals we called print impaired, because being print impaired basically meant, for example, if you were missing limbs like your arms and you couldn't turn pages, you couldn't use a standard book. So we were making documentation more accessible to a much broader community besides just the blind and individuals with other visual disabilities. So that's how DEC supported me. In fact, an interesting little story is the president and founder of Digital Equipment was Ken Olson. He's passed away quite a while ago. Ken called me up one day. Now you have to understand, I'm a little technical writer working in a little office, writing all these books. And Ken had heard about me through some circles, 20 levels up above me, and asked me if I could come and help him. I had no idea what it was. Turned out that a friend of his sent him an invitation to a dinner party that was in Braille, and he didn't know how to read Braille. I know how to read Braille just by looking at the. I don't read it with my hands. I read it by looking at the dots on a screen. So I said, "Look, I'll come down and I'll do that for you, but you have to do me a favor." And he said, "What?" And that was, "I want you to fund this program that I'm building." And he did. I read it for him, and he went to the party, and I got the funding for that program.
That is fantastic. And a lot of that presents, like the rest is history, right? So I just want to pause here for a moment because while you took us through, this background story of how you got started into the work that you do, that by the way has become so incredibly important to all of us because it's created standards now that, as you mentioned, not just only supports those who are maybe vision impaired, but it also is almost like the curb cut effect, right? It's something that was designed specifically for one community in mind, but now it benefits all of us. And so I love that you brought that to the conversation. But what I am listening for and what I'm hearing is the importance of how innovation and issues of accessibility and really caring about those who are in the margins, right? How just connecting and intersecting those two presents opportunities that can benefit the masses, right? And I think that's so important. I love when innovation and technology kind of intersects. Um, I just want to get you to respond and acknowledge and react to the fact that so much of your work has led to the significant standards that now are being followed that many of us take for granted. Maybe we don't even realize, but that's a pretty big deal.
Many of the standards that have been developed have made, for example, the web experience for older adults, for individuals who have perhaps learning disabilities or dyslexia, some other cognitive type disability besides visual disabilities and whatnot. These standards work very much like curb cuts. A curb cut today, most people take them for granted. They don't realize that they were designed for wheelchairs or for individuals perhaps who are using sticks to walk around a blind individual and make it easier. The reality is they make it easier for all of us. The purpose of standards at every level is intentionally to try and reach a broader audience, to facilitate access and usability for a much broader audience and an international audience at that. And so we found that these standards that we've been involved in, the Section 508 standards, for example, that Nika referred to before, Section 255 and Section 508, the last group that I was working with, or the last Federal Access Board Advisory Board Committee that I was, those standards were built in order to ensure that federal agencies in the government would ultimately procure, maintain, buy, and use technology that would be accessible to individuals with disabilities. Well, they've carried out to a much broader reach amongst the states and everything. I see Dr. White on screen right now, so maybe we'll come back to her.
Yes, I am back. I do apologize. I think there's a widespread outage that's happening in my area, but hopefully we will not be disrupted again. And I appreciate those who stepped in to keep the conversation going. So yeah, welcome back to me and to anyone else that may have got disconnected. So I want to keep it going because we still have about a half hour left, and I think there's so much more that we could learn from you, Mike. And so I'm going to go to the next question. And what I really want to do, I'm not sure if you had a chance to kind of talk about the reaction that as you think about all that you've accomplished, what comes up for you? Have you just kind of leaned into it and embraced it? Or some days do you sit back and think, wow, I was a part of that?
Yeah, well, yeah, there are definitely aha moments. There are definitely wow moments there. People often will bring up questions like yourselves and they're very reflective. But I think I've been very lucky. I mean, just to be very fair, very honest, I've been very lucky. There are times when I wonder, why am I even talking with a guy like Berners-Lee, who invented the World Wide Web? Why am I having a conversation with Vint Cerf, who invented, right, or was part of the group at the federal agency that invented the internet? You know, unfortunately, Vice President Gore probably liked to think that he did that, but we know that he didn't, and I know he knows that that's a joke, right? But I just the guy that invented markup languages, the guy that invented Ted Nelson, that invented the hyperstack and things along the hypercard language. I just seem to be at the precipice of when things like the internet and the World Wide Web, and now, AI is the big thing,
Yeah.
accessibility technology. I just have been very blessed, frankly speaking, and very fortunate to be involved. And uh, being the Italian, my wife likes to say, being the Italian that I am and the extrovert that I am, if I see something and I can take hold of it and run with it, I will. And that's what I've done. So it's really no more credit than that. There are a lot of people who have made what we have today in terms of, especially in terms of DE and I and A, especially for that, much better, much more important, much more profound experiences from other individuals, particularly my friends with disabilities.
No, you're so humble, but yes, I just wanted to give you a moment to kind of lean into all that you have contributed to such, remarkable things that are taking place right now. So I want to talk about the importance of web accessibility. So as an expert in the field, Mike, what are some of the most common misconceptions about web accessibility?
Yeah, the number one misconception is that it's a quote unquote blind thing, that it's only the blind who are having problems or challenges. That's not true. Every disability community that I know of is challenged by the web or by the internet or by social media and the things that are on the web that sit as layers on there. So that's the number one misperception. The other misperception, I think, and that's probably part of my own profession in industry's fault, is that for a long time, we said it's not that expensive, it's not that hard to do. It is. It is expensive. It is hard to do, but it's much easier if you've got that kind of DEI and accessibility mindset of what I call think accessibility. So if you organically, as I think that you mentioned before, Nika, if you build this mindset of think accessibility and it's built into the very fabric and culture of whatever kind of organization, small or large, then accessibility does become easier because you've built it in to your web and your digital environment. And from there, it's just maintenance. It's just like any other software product that it's out there. When Microsoft came out with Microsoft Office, you think it worked right the first time? They're still trying to fix it today. And that's 35, 40 years ago, right? When it came
Yeah.
out. So I think those are the two big misperceptions. I would like to speak to one other misperception, and it has a lot to do with AI today. And
Yes.
because of AI's influence on technology, bar none, right, pervasively, it does have an effect on disabilities and people with disabilities. And I hope we'll talk about that a little bit more so I could say precisely where we have seen some of the situations where people are profoundly affected by it. Anytime, anytime a mainstream emerging technology comes out, the disability community and the professionals that work in that space were already behind. We're already behind because they rarely, in fact, I think I could say this with 100% confidence. I have never seen a piece of software come out of mainstream technology that was usable and accessible to people with disabilities, ever. Just hasn't
Yeah.
happened. So that's why we're always behind. We're always trying to play the catch-up game with technology.
Yeah, and that's something to definitely amplify. I know for me, Mike, and I'm sure because you're directly centered into the space, that there has been some criticism from all of those who are serving in this role of being DEI practitioners, and that why is accessibility issues more of a second thought, afterthought, than it is really deeply embedded into all the different dimensions of diversity that we normally gravitate to. And I think that has improved tremendously over the past years with advocates like yourself really championing that. But it goes to what you just said. Even with the speed to market mentality that a lot of these developers have around getting AI technologies out into the world, the tendency is let's get it to market and then we'll kind of work out the kinks and address some of these other issues. And I'm glad that there are populations of people that are saying, hey, wait a minute, let's pump the brakes a little bit because these communities are incredibly important, and we also need to make sure we're solving for technology solutions with those individuals in mind, and that's part of what you've done
Yeah,
with your
exactly.
work. Yeah. So I want to talk briefly about how the strategies that you are sharing and amplifying for organizations can implement and foster a culture of inclusivity and to ensure that digital equality and equity for all users. What do you normally share with organizations as they are thinking about how to be very inclusive with their technology?
Yeah, well, you can appreciate that first and foremost. Most companies that come to my company, Audio Eye, prior to that, TPG, my namesake company, they come to us because there's a level of urgency. almost invariably there's a lawsuit involved because people are fighting for their rights, and so that whole
Yeah,
notion of DE&I comes into play. But when that happens, besides just the problem itself, the initial challenge of, oh no, our website is not accessible, doesn't meet the compliance standards, the real thing comes back to exactly what you just talked about, is how do we get the C-suite folks, the folks that are really the decision makers, how do we get them to indoctrinate a culture or create a culture of inclusivity? What
right.
we've been doing over the last 5 to 10 years, I think it'll go back to 10 years, but it's certainly more prevalent right now, is we have this notion of what's called um, an accessibility maturity model, right? And
Hmm.
which again is really just patterned after an existing kind of maturity model within an organization. But if you start with that, that is basically saying, who are we where disabilities and inclusion is concerned?
Right.
What do we have in place where disabilities and inclusion is concerned? And where do we fill the gaps? Where do we need to improve? And that becomes part ultimately of a strategy. And that strategy doesn't just mean the technical strategy, right? It means the cultural, the HR,
Yes.
the management side of it, the educational aspects of that, every aspect of what makes an organization, right? And then you've got to make sure that your leaders buy into this. I
Hmm.
I think that really is where the crux of the problem comes in. And unfortunately, with the current climate, that's going to be even harder, because now that organization after organization after organization is basically, killing off their DE&I programs, who's going to take the lead? I mean, before it was an EEOC type notion, right? It's an equal opportunity employment thing.
Yeah.
And I imagine that these kind of things are going to fall back into HR again. Although I don't understand I don't know where they would go when a company divests itself of its DE&I strategy. But either way, it doesn't really matter. If you don't have leadership buy-in, and a great example of this is like an organization like Microsoft. So you've got Jenny LaFiore, who's their chief accessibility officer over at
Hmm.
Microsoft. But Jenny has absolute support from Satya Nadella, their CEO. He
Hmm.
himself has children with disabilities. So I'm not surprised that he supports it, but you've got to have that kind of C-level support. And it can't be just the chief accessibility officer, because I think being in that role, it's more of a title than I think it is a real persuasive and influencer like role and responsibility that it should be, that it was intended to be. So Jenny is big at that. I like to try to pride myself, and I have other colleagues in the field who have been in similar roles. Larry Goldberg, Mike Shabanik. I can name these people. Peter Korn. One after another. We've all run into one another. Somewhere along the line, we've all kind of grown up with one another. But if you don't have leadership buy-in, it's not going to happen. It just won't.
Yeah. So much you shared just in that last clip that I think is worth amplifying. The first thing is, for organizations that are looking to play more effectively in this space of ensuring accessibility across their digital tools and resources, start with an accessibility maturity model, understanding where you are within that model, and then letting that help you to determine where there are gaps, vulnerabilities, risk, and opportunities, and then develop a strategy and a plan from there. And what I also heard you amplify, Mike, is the importance of this not being something that's like a singular initiative that's off in the corner, but it's something that's involving all of the key stakeholders. It's embedded into the culture of the organization. There's a holistic approach, and that really begins with leadership embracing and supporting and sponsoring this work, so that the accountability mechanisms can certainly ensure that a lens of disability inclusion is being brought to the work that the organization is trying to do in terms of committing deeper to accessibility. And I love that you mentioned also that the political climate that we're in right now is certainly should bring up concern for many of us as we think about the people with disabilities community and making sure that accessibility is something that is top of mind, even if some of the laws, the orders are maybe saying the opposite in terms of how intentionality that we need to be exercising with continuing to think about that population who is extremely an important and a large population, whether we realize it or not. Because here's the thing, disability is both visible and invisible. So when we consider that, there's probably so many people in our circles and our networks that we don't even know that this applies to. And so I think that's so important. So we are going to shift and allow comments and questions from our community here. So if you're part of our Zoom community and you have a question or comment, I invite you to use the raise hand feature that lets me know that you're willing for me to invite you to unmute yourself and share directly. And if your camera is on, I will also add you to the spotlight. If you're here and you really just want to present your questions or comments into the chat, we'll be checking that to make sure we bring those sentiments into the live dialogue. If you're on LinkedIn Live, we're not leaving you out. Go to the comment section. My team is watching that and bringing it over into our Zoom chat. So maybe while folks are percolating, I want to go to the next question. I love being able to provide practical, go-to tactical ideas for this community whenever we have guest co-hosts to share information that may not be widely understood. And so if you could share maybe the top 2 or 3 practical steps that individuals and organizations specifically can take to improve accessibility of their website and digital content. Almost all organizations have a website, so let's start there.
Yeah, so and I'll try to speak in terms of organizations that understand what it means to develop you know, a website at the engineering level and put that in plain language if I can.
Sure.
So I have always preached the importance of what you said earlier about a holistic approach, and you do that in the software development life cycle, right? SDLC is a very common term amongst engineers. In that software development lifecycle, it is important to do this first and foremost, integrate accessibility into that SDLC. So at design and conception of whatever you're going to develop, at that point right there, you need to consider some of the standards that are out there produced by the World Wide Web Consortium, its Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Look right there. So when you're developing standards for your software, but you're also developing requirements for what
Yeah.
this thing is going to do and how it should work. And in those requirements, accessibility standards and guidelines need to be woven in there. So there's one. That's concept, product concept. That's setting
Mhm.
up requirements. Now, next level is you're moving it into your development environment. So you're handing this off to the developers. So those developers need a couple of things. One is they need to know those guidelines. They need to understand them. How do I make an image, you know, usable and accessible to a person who's blind? Well, you put alternative text. How do I make sure that forms that we put up, because we're selling products and we want people to interact with us, so they need to fill out those forms. Those forms need to be coded a certain way in order for them to be navigated and to even be heard and announced to, say, for example, a blind person who's using a screen reader. So the developers need to be up to speed, and they need to be armed with their own tools. So, for example, at AudioEye, we have an SDK, a software developers toolkit. And as they're writing code, it prompts them and says, hey, you need to include this code or that code or this code. And then it tests what they're building. So use of tools, developer tools, is important, again, as we're going across that engineering lifecycle, that software development lifecycle. That gets you the developers their things. Then on we'll call it the back end of that product line, you have things like usability testing. So you have your usability folks test individuals with disabilities and
Mhm.
ensure that their technologies, the assistive technologies that they use, interact the way that they should, so that the experience is not just accessible, because you'll hear this a lot.
Yeah.
Make it accessible. Making something accessible is pretty easy. You could just put the code in. In theory, that makes it accessible. That's not true. That is not true. You can code it correctly and it still not be usable. That's why it's very important to include individuals with disabilities who use assistive technologies as part of your testing process. So usability testing and then quality assurance testing on the back end to make sure that whatever you release to the world on your web environment or your digital environment is usable and accessible. Finally, the last part of that SDLC is the marketing and it's the PR. Now, one of the things that has really become a big issue in our environment today is that the marketing has been built based on the trust marketing ethic, right? So
Yeah.
they've been, which, is not uncommon. People make products and we solved all the world's problems. Not true. You just can't do that. Be truthful, be honest about what your products can do, who they can serve, and how they enhance the user experience. But at the same time, don't make large claims that using our tools is going to make your site. They use the expression ADA compliant. It's just
Yeah.
possible to do that just with tools. So it's all of these things that I just talked about have to be integrated into it, and then message it truthfully. And I'm really big on that. I've written a number of blogs on trust marketing, being honest about what we say and what we project. That's something that our industry, including my own company, AudioEye, had been challenged by over the last few years. We've completely flipped our model, and our whole, AudioEye, I could speak for AudioEye, flipped our model in the way that we're presenting this to our clients and how we're working with our customer base.
You've just shared a lot. So I want to understand, I want to make sure that we can clarify SDLC. Tell us what those acronyms stand for, just to make sure we have that.
Software development lifecycle.
Software development lifecycle. Okay, thank you. And what I also heard you say, which was it was really interesting to me, is that there's a difference, a distinction between making something accessible and making it usable. So I appreciate you taking us through that. And also, I didn't hear you say this, but you certainly alluded to it, which was let's not just do the bare minimum to be compliant, but let's really take it steps further to ensure that goes back to that usability factor. How can we really optimize the experience for that community? So that it's not just, again, checking a box to say we've met the bare minimum from a compliance perspective. So thank you for that. Mike, I want to now shift a little bit. I'm not seeing any hands raised, and so this gives me a chance to kind of go to the next question. I want to talk about AI influencing the future of web and software accessibility, and what opportunities and or challenges do you foresee that are going to be presented as we think about, again, the rapid speed of AI technologies entering into the marketplace?
Yeah, so let me tell you about the opportunities first, and I'll talk about a couple of the challenges. So the opportunities I see are almost limitless. We've seen the inclusion of AI and AI technology in helping individuals who are have mobility disabilities. Complete exoskeleton skeletal systems that have been designed with AI in there to do and help and assist individuals who can otherwise walk, move their limbs and things along those lines.
Yeah.
There's been the inclusion of that into augmented and virtual environments as well that have been cutting edge, allowing people to do things, people with disabilities, various disabilities, whether they're autistic, right?
Mm-hmm.
They can recognize facial signs that they know and help them to interpret those things at that level. Or you get a technology that right now Microsoft and the organization or company called Be My Eyes is using a way of using that technology to help blind individuals have more of an assisted wayfinding type environment to identify things. All of that is AI based. Those meta glasses, that they've released now. I was just literally earlier this week working with an organization here in where are they based? They're based in Florida, and they're including Be My Eyes with the meta glasses and guide dogs for the blind. So lots of opportunity. At AudioEye, we're using AI as a means of more effectively and efficiently remediate websites on the fly.
Yeah.
Now, quicker, faster, and it scales better. It doesn't solve the problem at root. So that means at the source code level. But for a moment, it gives a user an experience that is more accessible than it would be if nothing had been done. And it gives the the website owner or the company that owns it, a time to kind of catch up, get the source code right, and then we move on. So that is all being driven by machine learning and artificial intelligence at that level. Now, what are the challenges? The
Mm.
number one challenge that you will hear is bias.
Yeah, of
So
course. Yeah.
artificial intelligence is all about math. In the long run,
Mhm.
it's all about math, right? And so it says, basically go out, gather all this data, and what is the commonality? Where's the common path? What is the most likely scenario? So when I'm hiring someone and I need them to be fit X, Y, and Z qualifications, go out and find those individuals that meet these qualifications. When they do things like that, bias comes into play and individuals with disabilities are edged out. That's what I call it. People call it bias. In other words, they're left out of the equation.
Right.
You've got to
Mhm.
write the algorithm in a way that includes people with disabilities as part of that collective, math activity that goes in there. That to me seems to be the number one thing that people in the disability community and technology community are trying to deal with. There are some other ones, but I find them to be more of a maturity thing that will just come with time, like even the remediation. We're able to get
Yeah.
30 to 40% accuracy now. We're working towards 50%. But if you're a person, you say, hey, we're 50% accurate. Well, how good is that? So we got to allow time, that maturity to take place. Over time, these things will get better and they'll do it faster and they'll scale across the board.
Yeah, no, I agree that bias is definitely one of the biggest challenges that technology is facing right now. Again, going back to the speed to release these new technologies, AI technologies to the market. And, I mentioned at the top of the hour that one of the LinkedIn learning courses that I have produced and instructed is on intersectionality lens of DEI with AI, and I definitely talk about some of that bias. And so I'm going to get my team to actually place a link to that in the chat for those that may be interested. But I want to leverage our remaining 7 minutes, and I have two questions that I want to get in for sure. This next question relates to what I shared when I read your bio, which is that your role as co-chair of the United States Federal Access Board's Telecommunications and Electronic and Information Technology Advisory Committee, TEITAC for short. But tell us, what is the specific role of that committee and this function, just to help us get a deeper understanding of the importance of this being a committee that's at that level.
Yeah. So to be clear, that committee no longer exists. It had a time uh, time box area of a couple of years that the federal government
Yes.
funded us from 2006 to 2008. And in that time frame, we did something that had never been done before, which was we pulled together 40 organizations, international in scope, that became part of this advisory committee to the Federal Access Board. And then we worked on two disability standards at the same time, which
Got it.
was Section 255 of the Telecommunications Act and Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act. So that was the cutting edge aspect of it. My role and my colleague's role as co-chairs, Jim Tobias, who has since passed away, Jim passed away about 2 years ago, was basically to oversee something that had never been done
Got
before.
it.
And you've got disability community and you've got large Fortune 100 companies. Everybody's got a little piece of the action to try to harness all of those folks and make these standards. But we did do it. We rolled out the new enhanced standards. Those standards exist today, and they are the standards that the federal agencies use in order to ensure that what they design, what they develop, what they maintain, and what they procure meets the standards for accessibility. So that's the big thing that came out of that, is that today, GSA is the one as oversight of that particular aspect of the federal access of that law, the Section 508
Yes.
standards, and the FAA? No. Was it the FCC? Sorry, FCC has the telecommunications part of it. So they're the ones that enforce the standards in the law.
Got it. Thank you for that clarity. I know we've talked a couple different times today, reference the standards that obviously you were very much involved in. And so it is that committee's work that led to those standards that are still
Exactly.
now operable, they're in place, they're being followed. Just real quickly, do you have any concerns of them being threatened at all?
Well, yeah, I think we're all concerned about anything as it relates to the current
Yeah,
climate of the
we don't know what
world.
we don't know. Yeah,
No, right. So right now it's there, it's sitting there, but yeah, I would
yeah,
not be truthful if I didn't say, yeah, I
yeah,
am concerned. But here's the thing about fear, right? I was funny. I was watching this movie the other night. I'd never seen it. What was the? I wrote it down here. It was a movie that I watched where the Justice League, and they had these characters on there that their whole purpose was to create fear. So
yeah,
how do you attack fear? How do you defend? You just get you go on the offense,
yeah.
right? So
Yes,
keep your passions moving, keep moving forward,
I
keep
agree with
making
that
things more
completely.
accessible.
Yeah,
Yep.
a message I've been amplifying. Yes. And so how often, just real quickly, how often are those standards revisited?
Um,
Is there really a protocol to revisit them to see what kind of evolution may need to be, considered?
there was a push for it last year. I don't know where that stands right now.
Got it.
Again, one administration to another, they've got a completely different agenda,
Sure.
view about priorities, and I don't see this as being a priority now.
Mm, yeah, unfortunately. Okay, thank you for that. So we have about 2 minutes left. And Mike, I want to give you an opportunity to close this out in a way that feels appropriate to you. And this is for you to share maybe any projects or initiatives that your firm is working on that you have a lot of energy and excitement around, or maybe there's something else you did not have a chance to socialize with this community that you want to leave us with. So before I turn the floor over to you, I want to thank you again for being here with us today. Thank you for all the work that you're doing. And we really appreciate all the insights. Thank you to this community that showed up today. We really appreciate you being a part of our community. And Mike, I want to turn it over to you for final remarks.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I really love being on the show. I know we needed more time. So anytime you need me to come back, want me to come back, I'm happy to discuss more of the things, more of the questions that we discuss. But here's a couple of things that we've got going in the Q at Audio Eye that I'm very excited about. Number one, we realize a lot of this is education and awareness. So we've
Yeah.
developed a whole platform around training our clients called Audio IQ. And it provides all the kinds of training that developers, engineers, HR specialists, what have you, DE&I offices that are still around can use and build that culture, that think accessibility mindset that we all have. So that's something Audio Eye provides. It's called Audio IQ. Another thing that we developed is our SDK, our software developer toolkit. So for developers that are there that are looking for an edge, a way of being able to test and build accessible source code, let us know. Look us up. We're out there to it's a licensable product that we sell, and it goes along with everything else that we offer in kind of a portfolio of products. Our new thing also is you used to go to our little accessibility overlay guide that you could touch on that, and that would used to spawn an overlay. It doesn't do that anymore. What it spawns now is a help desk in bug reporting system, so that if you're a user with a disability and you see this, it will launch open basically a form that's accessible, and you can say, look, I could not fill out this form, or I could not log in. File that bug, it goes to the company, and we can fix it right away. And then lastly, I think the biggest thing that I'm excited about working on is figuring out how can we scale accessibility, and that will be through AI and remediation. I'm very excited about the amount of work that we're putting into it, and every day we're getting better and better at what we do.
Love it. Thank you again, Mike Paciello. We so appreciate you being here. We've shared all of your contact information. I hope that you will reach out to learn more. There's also a YouTube link that we've placed there. And so we just appreciate you being part of our community and sharing with us today. Have a safe weekend. Again, happy Valentine's Day. We hopefully will see you back next week for another episode of Intentional Conversations.